Hello everyone, welcome to the second day of Selenium training. In the very first day, we saw various things like how to install Visual Studio, how to use various data types and all, and we saw a lot of things on the very first day. We also saw why Selenium is used and which all languages it supports and why do we use C# language. We just started with the basics of C# and I told you some basic stuff. So now let's move forward to some of the more advanced topics like loops, arrays and functions. And as we proceed, we'll also discuss why we need to study these topics, and while studying Selenium, where all in Selenium we will be using these concepts and making use of these concepts in learning Selenium. So let's open Visual Studio and let me create a new project. I'll add a new project, say module 2, and we'll just change the directory and I create a new project. Now we have our project created. Now out here what I'll do is, like say suppose I have a class with me known as concatenation operator. Now what is the concatenation operator? Say suppose this class contains the main function inside it, which actually contains a variable, say string x is equal to Selenium training. We have a variable x variable of the type string which is equal to Selenium training, right? And similarly another variable with us, that is your say your first variable is Selenium and we have the second variable y as Selenium training, the training value assigned to it. And then now what we want to do is I want to type Selenium training in one line. So what I'll do is I'll simply say console.writeLine x plus y. Now plus is the concatenation operator. We saw in the previous class as well that when we have this concatenation operator, this plus is considered as an concatenation operator. It is used for concatenating the strings and the various numbers, right? So for example, if I show you the execution, let me just write console.read key to read the output, and then now if I run my code, you see that it prints Selenium training in one single line. These Selenium and training are two different words assigned to two different variables, but it is being printed in one single line because we are concatenating the two strings with the help of this plus operator in between. Now say suppose I have two integer values with me. Say for example int a is equal to 100 and similarly int b is equal to 200. I have two values with me, and then say I print a plus b. I say print a plus b, then what it would print is, if I see the execution, it prints 300. That is, it simply adds the two variables a and b. 100 plus 200 is equal to 300. But if say suppose I write console.writeLine a plus b plus x plus y. Now if I print like this, and similarly I have one more statement with me, x plus y plus a plus b. Now I have these two commands with me, two statements, that is a plus b plus x plus y, similarly x plus y plus a plus b. And then now if I run my code, now what happens is, if you look at the last two lines of the output clearly, then it would be different. It would be difficult for you to understand, not up to your expectations. Well, the very first line where you say, where you're trying to print the result of a plus b plus x plus y, then this piece of command, what it does, it first of all adds the two numbers a plus b, that is 100 plus 200 is 300, and then it concatenates the result with the value of x and y. Right, so 300 concatenated with Selenium, then concatenated with the value of y, that is training. So execution starts from the left hand side. It starts from the left hand side. X and y are concatenated first, and then it is concatenated with the value of a, and then it is concatenated with the value of b. Right, similarly as I told you, the execution starts from the left hand side. So for the second piece of code, it will concatenate the two values x and y, that is Selenium training, right, and then concatenated with the value of a, that is 100, then concatenated with the value of y, with the value of b, that is 200. Right, so there is a potential difference between the two lines, between the output of these two lines. Had I been written something like this, console dot write line x plus y, hold on, x plus y plus a plus b. Now had I been written something like this, and then now if I run my code, now you see that what it prints is, it first of all concatenates the two string x and y, that is Selenium training, and then it adds the two numbers 100 plus 200 300, and then concatenate the result with the value of x and y, that is Selenium training. Okay, so then you need to put the values, the integer values, in the brackets. So you have to, like, you might get errors in your script as well while working with Selenium, and you might get confused, right? So you have to be very careful while using the concatenation operator. It never adds up directly, especially with the case of the strings. Alright, now moving forward, let's see how can we actually work with the loops. So till now, everything that we have discussed so far is present in every programming language, whether it is C# or whether it is Java or it is PHP, Python. The concepts remains the same for every programming language, how you declare the variables, okay, the data types. So now let's move forward to the concept of loops in C#. Alright, and then first of all we'll take the example of the while loop. So let me add a new class, say while loops. Okay, now in the while loop, what I'll have to do is, say, let me first of all create a main function to it. Alright, and then now first of all I will be initializing the variable, that is, say int I is equal to 0. Okay, so out here the first step is your initialization part, and after that we will be writing the while loop like this. While I is less than 10, while I is less than 10, just print the value of I and also increment the value of I by 1. Okay, increment the value of I by 1. So what is this? This is your condition. This is your condition which tells you that till the time the value of I is less than 10, keep on running the while loop and keep on printing the value of I and then incrementing the value of I by 1. So this last step is your incrementation, incrementing the value of I by 1, right? So now if I say run my code, if you directly click on the start button, then you will get some error saying like there are some build errors. I click on OK. Now what the error says, the error says program has more than one entry point defined. Well, since right now we had created a console application project, and in a console application project at a time you can have only one main function declared. So right now in my single project I have two main functions declared, which is not actually possible in a console app, right? So you have to have only one main function in a single project. So what we can do is either we can comment out the main function which we are not using as of now, or else second way is you right click on your project, you go to the properties of your project, then out here in the startup object you just select the class which you want to set as the startup class. So right now I am working with the while loop class, right? So I'll make this class as my startup class, will save the changes, and then now if you try to run your code, it is executing, but then why we were not able to see the output? Because we haven't written console dot read key to read the output. I'll run it once more. So now you see that it prints the number from 0 to 9. So while loop is something which will keep on running every time till the time the condition that you have specified is satisfied. This I is less than 10 is the condition, and I is equal to I plus 1, it is the incrementation or the decrementation. Decrementation part. Okay, so while loop will keep on executing itself. And you can even see the execution of the while loop by debugging the program as well. What do you mean by debugging? That is running the code line by line as per the way you want it to run, as per the way you want it to control. So debugging is very strong, it's very powerful concept as well. You need to learn it, because while writing your big Selenium scripts you can get an error. So to resolve those errors we'll need to debug the program, and then we will need to see the execution of the program line by line. Alright, so how you debug your code, that is first of all you have to put the breakpoint. So I can out here in this gray bar you just click anywhere where you want to insert the breakpoint. So suppose I'll be inserting a breakpoint out here. Alright, so I have put in the breakpoint, and then now if I click on the start button, the cursor will come to the breakpoint where you have added in your code. The cursor will stop there, and then next you want to check your code line by line. You want to move inside your code line by line, right? So for that the key to debug is you hit F10, and then the cursor, you see that it is running, it is going line by line inside your code. So initially the value of I is equal to 0, right? And then I hit F10 again, it checks the condition 0 is less than 10, so it goes inside this while loop. It will print the value of I, that is 0, then it will increment the value of I by 1, that is I is equal to 0 plus 1 is equal to 1. Right, so now the value of I would be equal to 1. Then next it will again check 1 is less than 10. Yes, true. So go inside this while loop, print the value of I, that would be 1. Then after that increment the value of I by 1. So I will be equal to 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Right, so again it will check the condition 2 is less than 10, so it will again go inside this while loop, will print the value of I, will increment, and accordingly till the time this condition is satisfied it will keep on going inside this while loop and will execute your logic, right? And then so F10 is the key to actually move inside your code line by line, right? Similarly, you have F5 key. Now when you hit F5 key, that means you directly want to run your code, right? So you have hit in the F5 key, so then you see that we can see the overall result, the overall output of our logic, that is it prints the result from 0 till 9. So breakpoints are very powerful. I have told you just a small example right now. When you will be running bigger scripts using Selenium, actually you'll get to know more exactly, much more exactly where is the practical usage of these breakpoints, inserting the breakpoints in your code, and how can you debug the code. Alright, now you can even write I plus plus as well, that is also known as post increment, right? That is the value of I has been incremented by 1, that is I is equal to I plus 1. So it's one and the same thing. Either you write I is equal to I plus 1 or I plus plus, it's one and the same thing. Or else what can be done is, now this logic is actually printing the integers, the numbers from 0 till 9, right? Or else what can be done is, now if you want to print the numbers in the reverse order, so I is initialized to 10, right? And then we will check if I is greater than 0, then print the value of I, and then I would be equal to I minus minus. Then in that case, it would be decrementing the value of I by 1 in every execution. So now if I see the result, okay, we have the breakpoint added, so let me just remove it. In order to remove the breakpoint, you again click onto the location where you have added your breakpoint, and then I click on the continue button. So then you see that now it prints the digits, the numbers in the reverse order from 10 till 1. Okay, so it prints the result in the reverse order. So this is how we actually initialize the loops, the while loop, that is how you initialize the while loop and what is the syntax for it. Now before we move on to the next loop, that is your for loop, let us see the disadvantage of the while loop first. Well, the disadvantage of the while loop is that if you don't give the incrementation or the decrementation part, then you are stuck in an infinite loop. My loop is stuck infinitely. You see that? You see, it is printing 10 till the time, like it will keep on printing infinitely. I have to forcefully stop the program, then only it will be stopped, otherwise it will keep on running your code again infinitely. So this is what is the disadvantage of the while loop, if you don't give the incrementation or the decrementation part. So this is equally important, right? Now coming towards the next loop, that is your for loop. So let me add a new class for it, that is your for loop. Again I'll add a main function to it first of all. Okay, and then I need to initialize my for loop. So what is the syntax for it? You have for int I is equal to 0, I less than 10, and I plus plus. Alright, so the first part is your initialization part. I is being initialized to 0 initially. Then the second part is again your condition, and the third part is your incrementation or the decrementation part. So for loop will actually overcome the disadvantage of the while loop that we had just discussed few seconds ago. Alright, fine. Now coming to the for loop, this is what is the syntax. You have the initialization, condition, and the incrementation or the decrementation part. So everything So I'm forced to give everything in one single line. There is no chance of infinite loop, of getting stuck in an infinite loop in the case of the for loop. Alright, so I have this for loop, and then inside this let me just print the value of I. So now, okay, let me just make this as my startup class. I'll make the for loop class as my startup class. We'll save the changes, and then now if I run my code, okay, let me also write console dot read key. Okay, and now if I run my code again, so then now you see that this for loop is also printing the same, no doubt the same result, but we are making use of the for loop, that is it prints the result from 0 till 9. So the basic motive of both the loops is same, but the syntax is different for the different loops. For loop, like for loop is much more famous than the while loop. Alright, now say suppose I want to print the sum of 1 to 100 numbers. Alright, so then what I'll have is, say suppose I have a variable with me int sum is equal to 0 initially, right? And then I'll write a for loop for int n is equal to 0, the number n is equal to 0, n less than equal to 100, n plus plus. Okay, so like we want to print the sum of the integers from 0 till from 1 till 100. Okay, so I say from the number 0 till it is 100. Okay, so then if this condition is satisfied, initially it would be 0 is less than 100, right? So it will go inside this for loop, and then what it will do is it will print the sum. So then sum would be equal to, sum is equal to sum plus n, right? And then in the end we will just print the result, that would be sum of first 100 numbers is sum. Alright, so let's just comment out this section, and then now if I run my code, it says that the sum of the first 100 numbers is 50. Now how did this logic work? How did this happen? You can even debug the program again to understand this. Okay, so what we can do is we can simply put a breakpoint out here, and then now if I run my code, so adding breakpoint will actually execute your code line by line. So I hit F11, okay, or F10 key. So initially the value of n is equal to 0 is less than equal to 100, go inside this for loop. So then the value of sum would be equal to 0 plus 0 is 0, right? So again it will now then in the next loop it will increment the value of n by 1. So then n would be equal to 1 is less than equal to 100, the condition is true, so it goes inside this for loop, and then it will print the value of, it will equate the value of sum to, sum is equal to, initially this value of sum was 0, so 0 plus 1 is 1, right? So then in my sum variable I will have the value as 1, right? Then similarly in the next run the value of n would be 2, right? So 1 plus 2 would be 3, so value of sum would be 3. Okay, and it will continue till the time this condition is satisfied, right? So hitting F10 key will actually with which you will be able to execute your code line by line. Okay, and if I hit F5 key, then it will directly run your code and will show you the result, that is sum of first 100 numbers is 50. So this is just a sample program of the for loop. For loop is like, we have just written a for loop to find the sum of the first 100 numbers. Okay, so you can write the for loop to print the first sum of the first 100 numbers. You can print the numbers as well from 1 till 100 and so on, according, like you can just take any example and any sample example for understanding these loops. Okay, now practical example for the for loop is, that is, how can you use loops with Selenium. Okay, that is where will we be using loops in Selenium. Well, say suppose you have an Excel file with you. Okay, you have an Excel file with you, say it is your uh, test data.xlx file. You have an Excel file with you which actually contains some columns inside it, say username, then we have password, then we have email, and then we have the zip. Say suppose an Excel file has 4 columns: username, password, email, and a zip code, right? So then what you have to do is, now I have the data on each and every row. So right, so while executing this stuff with the Selenium, what you will be doing is you will be reading the Excel file with C# to write your data driven scripts in Selenium. So to write the data driven scripts using a for loop, we will have to iterate through the row number as well as the column numbers one by one. So using for loop, we will be iterating through the entire Excel sheet. And this is the major usage of the for loop in Selenium while learning with C#. Some of them might be finding it very simple, so just have patience, because there are people who don't have any knowledge of C#. So for them this would be very beneficial. So it, like you would be we would be moving to some advanced topics as well, right? These are just the basic stuff, the basic concepts of the C#. Okay, so you need to practice them at your end. Until and unless you don't practice, you're not going to learn anything from this training. So I would just say, just practice and practice how much as you can. Alright, now going forward, let's understand what are arrays. What arrays are. What is the practical advantage of the arrays, how arrays are used, what are arrays, and how can the arrays be used practically with Selenium. So then now let me add a new class in my project named arrays, right? And then we'll just add a main function to it. Now what actually is an array? Say for example, I have a lot of data with me, that is your username, password, email ID, and the zip code of the city. So let me just make some variables for that. Say you have a username, then you have some value for the username. Similarly, you have the password of the user. Similarly, I have the email ID, say it is x@gmail.com. then similarly I have the zip code of the city with some value. Now sometimes you will have a lot of data with you. This is just a little bit of data that we can see right now. So this will be very confusing, because suppose you've got 100 fields on the web page and you need to fill the value in those 100 boxes using Selenium. So what exactly will you do? So out there we will be using something known as arrays. Now what actually is an array? Array is basically a memory location in which you can store multiple values. For example, say suppose you have an array with you, right? You have an array. So array will look something like this. Each box is like an house, and you recognize the house by its house number. That is, the first element in the array would be located at the 0th element, then 1, 2, 3 and 4 and so on. So array will look something like this. It will have these sections like this divided in the array, and then you will be storing the values inside the array like this. The first element, like the first is your username, then the password, email ID, zip code and so on. So each section can store something, and each section has got an index with it, similar to the way like every house has got a house number for it, right? So we can simply make a string array like this. Say you create the array string str is equal to new string, and then you need to give the size of the array. That is, say suppose I say I will be having 5 elements in my string array. So this array has got 5 houses inside it. The first house would be at the 0th index, right? Then the second house would be at the first index, then it would be at the second, third and fourth. So all the 5 houses, like the 5 houses will be present at the 0th, 1, 2, 3 and 4 indexes, right? Because it is because the indexing actually starts from the 0th index, right? So I can simply store the values for the arrays, like say you store the value for the first element that would be at the 0th index with some value, right? Then similarly you store the value for the second element present at the first location with again some value. Then similarly I store the value for my third element, that would be your email ID. So I store the email ID for my third element. Similarly I store the element for the value for the fourth element, that is your zip code of the city, right? And similarly your last element present at the fourth location, say suppose it is your city, right? So I can give any value for the city. Later on, when we will actually be reading the advanced topics, we'll be actually reading these values from the Excel file and put it inside the array, right? Now out here there is a drawback of the arrays as well. Now what is that drawback is, if the array is of the type string, then you have to give the maximum capacity of the array. And if the array is of type integer, then you have to give the number, that means the number of integers that integer array can hold, right? Say suppose I want to initialize my integer array, right? So in that case as well you have to specify the size of the array. That means this integer array can have 4 elements inside it. String array, and then string array cannot hold the integer values, an integer array cannot hold the string values. Similarly, the character array cannot hold the integer as well as the string values. So arrays is for a particular data type. You cannot store the different data types in the respective array. There is a solution for that as well. We'll just tell you in some time. Okay, now one of the major drawback is the size of the array. Sometimes you don't know the amount of data which I will be having in my particular scenario, which we will be actually reading from the Excel file in the case of Selenium. For example, like say right now I say that I am reading 4 values from the Excel file, but tomorrow say suppose 2 more fields get added up in your framework. You also want to read the city, you also want to read the address, the phone number and many more fields. So in that case, if you specify the size of the array previously, then it would be difficult for you to read the values which have been newly added, right? So this is also one of the major point for the case of arrays. Now let us understand some features of the arrays first. Okay, that is if I want to find the length of an array, then how can you do that? Now for example, if I want to get the length of an array, so I can simply say I want to get the length of the string array, so string dot length. You have a property named length property. Okay, so now if you say, let's just run the output. I write console dot read key, and then we'll just make the startup class as my arrays. We'll save the changes. Okay, and then now if I say run my code, you see that it says that the length of the array is 5, which is true. The string length, the length of the string array is 5, right? Similarly, if I want to get the length of my integer array, then I can do that as well. I can simply say get me the length of the a array, that is your a dot length. So now if I run again, I get the length as 4 for my integer array, which is a 4. Right, now if you want to print all the elements of this string array, then for that you can simply write the for loop. We want to print all the elements of an integer array, of a string array. So I write a for loop for int, say x is equal to 0, x less than the total number of elements you have inside the array that you would be getting from the length, x plus plus. Right, so that means the value of x would go from 0 till the length of the array, right? So that is 1 less than the length of an array. Fine. Why starting with 0? It is because the first element would be at the 0th index, right? So I'll iterate from 0 till the length of the array, and then just print all the elements at the x index one by one, right? And then so when you run it for the first time, the value of the x would be 0, so it will be printing the value of the str0, that would be this. Then similarly the value of x would be incremented by 1, then it will print the value of str1, similarly str2, and till the length of the array, that is till your str4. So when I'll run, you see that it prints all the elements, all the 5 elements of the string array like this, right? Similarly, you can even print the elements of the integer array as well. Say suppose you store the values for the integer array. Say I store the values, then similarly the second element present at the first index with some value, then similarly I store the value for my third element 300, and similarly the fourth element with the value as say 400, right? And then you want to print all the elements of the integer array as well. So we'll again write a for loop for int y is 0, y less than the total number of elements you have in the integer array, that would be a dot length, and y plus plus, and then you print all the elements of the integer array, that would be your a at the yth location. Okay, so if I run my code, you see that first of all it prints all the elements of the integer array 100, 200, 300 and 400, and then it also prints the values, the elements of the string array. And if you want to print the integer array in the reverse order, that is the last index would be printed first and then so on, right? If you want to print it in the reverse order, so in that case what we will do is we will have to start the value of I with length of an array, that is a dot length minus 1, because the last index will be the length minus 1, right? It is because the indexing is actually starting from the 0th index, right? So starting from the length of the length of an array, and till the time it is greater than equal to 0, right? And then you want to print it in the reverse order, so y minus minus, and then you print all the elements of the array. So let me just comment out this section, the string array, and then now if I run it, you see that now the integer array is being printed in the reverse order, starting from the last till your first element. Okay, that is for the very first time the length of an array is 4, so 4 minus 1 would be 3, right? So it will print the value of a3, that would be 400. Then it will decrement the value of by 1. 3 minus 1 is 2, so, right? So 2 is greater than equal to 0, so it will print the value of a2, then similarly a1 and a0. Alright, so okay, now let us see two-dimensional array. Okay, and then in Selenium we will be actually using the two-dimensional array only. Now how does your two-dimensional array looks like? So let's just see that. Now what happens in the two-dimensional array is the data is actually represented in the form of rows and columns. So we have something known as the rows and the columns in the case of 2D array. Okay, so 2D array looks something like this. It has got rows and columns. So rows and columns will be there inside your 2D array, and inside each and every cell we will have the data. So the row number, it would be starting from the 0th index, 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on. Similarly, the columns would also be starting from the 0th index, 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on. Alright, now to make the 2D array, what we need to do is, first of all, let's just create a new class only. So let me add a new class, say two-dimensional array. We'll add a main function to it. And then we'll just initialize the 2D array. That would be initialized as, say, string x is equal to new string, and then you need to specify the elements, the length of the array, 2D array, that would be the total number of rows and total number of columns. Okay, so I say that in my 2D array I will have 3 rows and 4 columns. So the first parameter is for the rows, how many number of rows you will have, and second parameter is for the total number of columns that you would be having in your 2D array. Alright, and then we will initialize the values inside the 2D array with this much rows and this much columns. So let me just initialize the values for the first row. So we'll initialize the value for the first row, that would be x at the 0th location, 0th row and 0th column. It would have the value as, say, a. Right, then similarly I initialize the value for my first row, second column with the value as b. Similarly first row, third column, right, with the value as c. And similarly I initialize the value for my first row and the fourth column with some value as, say, d. Alright, so the row number is 1. We are initializing the value for the first row. So first row will have the 0th index, right? And columns is 0, 1, 2 and 3. So how the data would be present in your 2D array practically is, you are first of all initializing the value for the 0th row, 0th column. So the 0th row, 0th column will have the value as a. It will have the value as a. Right, similarly 0th row, first column, 0th row, first column will have the value as b. Similarly 0th row, second column would have the value as c, and 0th row, fourth column would have the value as d. Right, so this is actually, similarly now we will initialize the value for the second row, that is at the first index. So this is your first row, 0th column. Right, then similarly first row, first column, and similarly first row, the third column, and first row, the fourth column would be at the third index. Okay, so this is how the data is actually stored in the 2D array. We'll tell you practically the usage of the arrays as well, why this is used in Selenium. That also we'll just discuss in few minutes. Okay, similarly, like right now I have initialized the value for my first row. I can even initialize the values for my second row as well. So let me just initialize the value for my second row. Okay, so second row is at the first index, so it will be at the first index, right? And the column indexing, first row first column would be at the 0th column, right? 0th column. Then similarly the second row second column would be at this, right? And then say I initialize the value for my second row. Okay, I initialize the value, and similarly you initialize the value for the third row as well. Okay, and the third row would be at the second index, and then I'll change the value, say A2, similarly B2, and I change the values for the elements present at the third row. Alright, now why do we use the 2D arrays in Selenium? I just showed like right now I just showed you an Excel file having 4 columns: username, password, email ID, and the zip code. Now when we actually read this data from the Excel file, in the case of Selenium we will be reading it actually inside the 2D array. Now the C# code will actually read the data from the Excel file in the 2D array. So that is why we have to, like right now we are just understanding the concept of the 2D array, when practically we will be actually using the Excel array, the Excel file from which we will be trying to read the data from. It would be stored in the form of rows and columns, right? So that is why out there we will be actually implementing the 2D array. We don't like we actually we will not be reading the data from the Excel file cell by cell. We will actually put the whole data in the 2D array, and then we will be returning the 2D array in the end, in which we will be having the entire data in the form of rows and columns. Alright, now how to actually print the 2D array? I need to write a for loop which can print each and every value from the 2D array. So first of all, let's just print how many total number of rows are there in the 2D array. So the total number of rows, it can be printed by simply writing hold on, you say the total number of rows are x dot get me the length of the 0th dimensions. Okay, so if you just see the execution, let me just show you the output first of all, and console dot read key, and then we'll make the startup class as the 2D array. Okay, and then now if I say run my code, you see that it says that the total number of rows are 3. Okay, so I gave the command as rows are x dot get me the length of the 0th dimension. So the rows is at the 0th dimension and columns is at the first dimension. Okay, so the first dimension, the size of the rows is present, it would be allocated at the 0th dimension. Okay, fine. Similarly we can even get the total number of columns. So the total number of columns are get me the length of the first dimension. Okay, that will actually give you the total number of columns, which are actually 4 in my first row. Alright, now next I need to print each and every value inside the 2D array. So for that we'll have to write a for loop. So let me just initialize my for loop for int row num is equal to 0, row num less than the total number of rows you have. So how many total number of rows you have, get me the length of the 0th dimension, right? And then row num plus plus, row num plus plus. right? So why have I initialized my row number with 0? It is because I want to start from the first row. I want to print the data from the first row, that is at the 0th index. Alright, and then so what this for loop will do is it will be iterating over each and every row one by one. Then inside my for loop I will have to write another for loop for iterating over the total number of columns that you will be having inside your 2D array, right? So another for loop we write for int column number is equal to 0, column num less than the total number of columns you have, so x dot get the length at the first dimension, and column number plus plus. Alright, so once I iterate over all the columns, next I would be getting the data. Okay, so then I would be getting my data for the row num as well as the column number. So then now if I run my code, it will print the complete 2D array, right? So then what we have done is we have iterated through the complete 2D array. Now let's just make it more clear, the output of the execution. Let's just make it more clear. So what I'll do is, say I have console.write, just print the value in a more clear way, right? And then we'll move the cursor to the new line. So then now if I run it once more, you see that it prints the result for 3 different rows in a single line, right? So we have seen the practicality of the 2D array right now. We have seen the single dimensional arrays as well, right, and the 2D array also. Now most of the time we will be using the 2D array only when dealing with the test data. Now the only drawback of this array is that it cannot be determined in the beginning that what amount of length of the array should be there, right? And this is all about the 2D array. Now one more thing which is left with the 2D array is that in a string array, if I want to put an integer, then I cannot put the integers. Similarly, if I make an integer array, if I make an integer array, then inside an integer array, if I want to put a string, I cannot do so. So I need an array in which I can put multiple types of data, because in my test data I can have a zip code available, I can have a zip code, I can have a city. Zip code can be numerics, whereas city can be an alphabet, right? So you can have integer as well as string values. So I might have different kind of test data. So for that we have something like an object array. We have something known as an object array, right? So you have an object array with you, that is, say object data is equal to, you declare your object array and then you need to specify the total number of rows. Okay, so what is an object array? Object array is an inbuilt class inside C#. So we'll talk about this class in detail as we move on with the course, when we'll actually see how will we be reading the data from the Excel file when we will be working with the Selenium scripts. Okay, so that time it will be much more clearer to you. So right now just keep in mind that there is an object array which is an inbuilt class in C#, which will actually hold all the data types inside it. Okay, so the advantage of this object array is that it can store multiple data types, that is this data array. Okay, this data array at the 0th location. So in the very beginning, while initializing the object array, we just have to specify the total number of rows I would have in my object array, right? Then for every row you have to declare the total number of columns. So I say that my first row will have 4 columns, right? And then you need to specify the data, that is your 0th row, 0th column. 0th row, 0th column would would have the value as say hello. Okay, hold on. Yeah, so my first row would be having the value as hello, which is a string type, right? Similarly, if I assigned the integer value, then it can also take an integer number as well, right? Similarly, if you want to store some boolean value, then it can even store the boolean value as well, right? Or else it can also store some decimal value also. It can store any type of value. So object array can store any type of values inside it. So this is all about the arrays, single dimensional array as well as the 2D array. And in Selenium we have something known as object array that we will be making use of. Alright, fine. Now moving ahead, let's come to the functions. What are functions? So let's create a new class for the functions in C#. Now functions are very important. It is independent. It is the small unit of execution. Alright, now say when I create a main function, public static void main. Now this is a function. This main is a function, we all know, right? Starting with the curly braces and ending from the curly braces, and out here inside this curly braces we would be having the scope of the main function. What would be the scope of the main function? All the code has to come inside this main function, right? Similarly, you can even create your own functions as well. Say for example, I have public static void say test. I have one function declared, test function. Now what is this static, what is this void, what is this public, will just will be clear to you in just few minutes as we proceed with the course. Alright, now this test is the name of the function. If I write inside my main function, say for example I print anything over here in main function. Alright, and similarly in my test function I print in in test function. Alright, and fine. So let me just change my startup class to functions. Now we'll save the changes, and then now if I run my code, so then you see that it just printed in main function only, because console, just hold on, let me just write console dot hold on, console dot read key. Okay, so now if I run my code, in the output it prints in main function, because we are just we all know the execution, it starts from the main function, right? So in your main function you have just one statement printed in main function, so it prints the result accordingly, right? It doesn't print the in test function. So functions are not executed as they are, as they look like. They will be executed, okay, but actually they are not. Now the functions are inside the class, are declared inside the class body only. All the functions should be there inside your class body. They should be parallel to each other. You cannot make a function inside a function. I cannot make a function inside a function, that is say, okay, you cannot just do so. Public void and say sample function. We cannot just declare a function inside a function. This is not possible. Okay, so this is not possible. I cannot do so. You will get an error otherwise. Alright, now if I want to print this statement in test function, then I will have to call this function in my main function, because main function is only called. Okay, main function is the one in which the control comes by default when the program runs for the first time. Now if I simply call my test function over here, let me just call my test function in my main function, and then now if I run my code, so then you see that it prints in main function and then it prints the result of the test function as well, that is your in test function. Why? It is because when the control comes to the main function, it will print this statement and then it calls the test function, so then it will navigate to the test function and then it will print this statement in test function. Okay, and then you come out of the main function. So the order in which the program executes is the serial order. In the main function, first of all in the main function, then it prints the result of the test function. Alright, and then you can just create any number of functions inside a single class, say public static void, say print name. Okay, hold on, and then you print anything over here, say Selenium C# training. Okay, you can just print anything over here, and then we will be calling this function inside my main function in the end. Alright, so then if I run my code again, it prints in main function, in test function, then Selenium C# training, the code of the print name function. Okay, that too in the end, because I told you the execution is actually done in the serial order. So this is very useful thing. Functions is something which can execute itself again and again. Suppose you've got 100 test cases with you and all of them requires you to log in inside the application first of all. So instead of writing the whole piece of code to log in inside the application, which will help you log in inside the code, you can just write the code inside a single function and then you can call that function again and again from all those 100 test cases. So I'm just giving you an example as of now. How will we be doing this practically? We'll see each and everything when we'll understand Selenium. Alright, okay. Now the next thing is you can even pass the values inside a function as well. For example, I have a new class with me, say function underscore passed in values. Okay, now say suppose inside this I will make a function, say public void sum all, inside which you have some parameters defined, int a, b and int c. You have some parameters a, b and c, right? So this function, it takes 3 parameters which will actually add these 3 numbers. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll simply say int sum is equal to a plus b plus c. Okay, and then I have a main function actually. First of all, and then what happens is I will be calling this sum all function inside my main function. Okay, so for that I will have to declare this function as static, because static things can only be accessed in a static main function, right? So I call my sum all function, inside which I need to pass the three parameters, the three numbers a, b and c, say 2, 5 and 1, the values of a, b and c. Alright, fine. And okay, and then what you do is you just print the value of the sum as well in the end. I'll print the values of the sum also. Okay, so then let me just change my startup class as function passed in values, and then now if I run my code, so then okay, let me just also write console dot read key. Alright, and then now if I run again, you see that it prints the result, that is 2 plus 5, 7 plus 1 is 8. That is the sum of the three numbers 2 plus 5 plus 1. Similarly, I can have this function called any number of times for the different values, say 4, 5, 3 and 8, right? Similarly, another function will call the same function for some other set of data, so 4, 6, 9. Okay, and any number of times you can just access this function. It will simply print you the result for each and every data set. So functions is like a factory in which you supply something and output, and then output comes in front of you to the logic that you have applied inside the functions. So functions can be called any number of times. There can be any function in a class. Okay, so functions have to be actually parallel to each other, and number of arguments you specify inside a function have to be same with the number of arguments you passed from the main function. I cannot pass a string value out here. I cannot pass a string value when I'm calling this sum all function from my main function. The sum all function actually accepts the three integer values. Okay, because I say that it accepts the integer value, so we'll have to make another function. So suppose if you want to pass a string value, so in that case we'll have to create another function that accepts a string value. Okay, the first value as a string value, fine, and then the rest of the values are integer values, say int y and int z. Alright, so then if I am calling my sum all function that accepts the first parameter as a string, okay, so then if you see that in my second function I didn't do anything, I'm not doing anything, so it didn't gave you the result for the first sum all function, but it gave you the result for the second, the next two sum all function, the sum of the three numbers 5, 3 and 8 and 4, 6 and 9, that is 16 and 19. Okay, so although the names are same of the two functions, sum all and sum all, but these are actually distinguished by the parameters you specify inside them. Alright, now if I declare a variable, any variable inside my sum all function, say int temp is equal to 10. Now this is actually your local variable. That means the life of this variable is only inside this function only. Similarly, this sum is also a local variable. This is also a local variable. Now if I print, now out here I am printing console.writeLine the value of the sum. Okay, now if I say print this in my second function, which is having the parameter string, integer and integer, then I will get an error for this sum variable, because the life of this sum variable is only inside this function only. Okay, now say for example, if I declare a variable inside a main function, say int say string d is equal to a selenium. Oh sorry, I have any variable declared inside my main function, right? Then this d variable will be accessed inside the main function only. It cannot be declared outside the main function. Okay, so suppose if if you try to access the d variable from here, then you cannot do so. So the local variables can only be called inside the functions in which they are declared. Okay, so these are your local variables. Fine, so just comment out, or we'll just remove this code since this is not possible. Okay, now the next thing is a function can also return back a value, a variable or a value. For example, I have this sumall function with me, okay, and I want to check whether this result is greater than 100 or not. And if it is greater than 100, I want to print the greatest of all the numbers. Else if it is less than 100, then just print the lesser value. Okay, then just it should print a less. So then what I'll do is, you see out here by default we have given public static void sumall. So void is a return type. It means void is actually a return type. It means it would return you nothing. Void means it would return nothing. So function can accept any number of arguments, but a function can return only one value at a time if a function want to return. For example, I want the sum to be accessed inside my main function. So when I call this sumall function out here, I want that when this function is called, it should send back some value, that is your sum of the three numbers, so that I can check whether the sum is greater than 100 or not, right? So in that case what we will do is we'll just change the return type of this function, which means nothing, to integer value, to integer. That is, this function will now return you an integer value, and it is mandatory to write a return statement in the end if a function is returning you any value. So then I would say I just return me the sum in the end. Okay, if you don't write this, then you will get an error for the sumall function. Okay, so I need to return something, and then I would be getting the result in an integer value, right? So then I say I will be getting the result in an integer value for the sum of these three numbers, and then I can keep a check over here that if the value of s is greater than 100, if it is greater than 100, then just print greater than 100. What value? The s value. Else it would be lesser than 100. Sorry, it would be lesser than 100. Alright, so fine. So now if I say run my code, it says that the value is lesser than 100. Which value? 5 plus 3 plus 8 is 16. So 16 is lesser than 100. Okay, so 16 is less than 100. Similarly, we can even make another function inside this class itself, that is your public static void say find sum. Find the sum of a number, any number. Okay, so whatever number you give sorry, whatever value you give to this n variable, it will find the sum from 1 till that number and return me back some value as well. So then, since it should return us some value, so then it would have to, we will have to change the return type to an integer value, right? So then I would say that, say int sum is equal to 0 initially, and then we'll have to write a for loop for int x is equal to 0, x less than equal to any number that you would be giving, and x plus plus. Okay, and then you have to actually print the sum of all the numbers. Okay, that is sum from 0 till the total number of numbers you have. Okay, and then in the end we will be returning, sorry, we would have to return the sum. Alright, and then we can simply call this find sum function inside our main function. Say suppose I want to find the sum of first 100 numbers. Okay, so then you would simply be getting the result as well, say in an integer a variable, in any variable. Okay, you get the result and then you just print sum of 100 numbers is your a value, right? So then now if you run your code, it says that the sum of first 100 numbers is 50. Similarly, I can even print, so find sum, you want to find the sum of the first 200 numbers. Okay, so you can even print the result of the sum of the first 200 numbers, that would be 20100. Okay, so this is how you work with the functions. Okay, whatever we find, whatever we send something inside it, you will be getting the result as well in return. Alright, now say suppose I have a new class added, that is your say utility functions. I have one more class added with me, utility functions. Now what I'll do is, say suppose I'll create a function out here which will generate a random number from 1 till any number. Okay, so I have, say public static int generate a random number. Just generate a random number till this number. Okay, so generate random number function will actually return you back the random number between 0 till that number. Okay, so this function will actually be returning you the number from 0 till the number that you specify. So suppose from 0 till 100 I want to generate a random number, right? So any number lesser than 100 it would be printing. Now say suppose if I have a main function as well, okay, and then I'll say call this generate a random function. Say suppose I want to generate a random number till 50. Till 50 I want to generate any random number, right? So it will return you a number lesser than 50. So for doing this, we need to understand the random class first of all. So we have a random class in C sharp, say random, oh sorry, you create the object of the random class and then you just print random dot next. Alright, and then you just will be returning this random number, right? Okay, so we'll tell you what actually is the practical usage of the functions in Selenium as well. For example, in Selenium we will have a function like it would be something like say public static bool do login function, inside which you will be passing in the username and the password with which you have to log in inside the application, right? So you have a do login function. So out here we'll be writing the Selenium code to actually open the URL, then navigate, like open the browser, navigate to the URL, then send in the username and the password and click on the login button. So this function will actually help you log in inside the application, and after that, in the end, once the login is successful, it will return you true or a false value, true or if it is a failure. So similarly, you can even make many more functions according to your requirement. Say for example, a function to register a user on the application, a function to sign out from the application, right? So you can make any number of functions according to your requirement in the application. So functions are very, very important.